Hey guys, cops are everywhere tonight. We're at a new bar. Shh! Free speech is prohibited. And in prohibition, you can only hear it at speakeasies. So just be quiet, keep to yourselves. Let's listen to these two. We got Candace Owens on the right and Dr. Cornel West on the left. And we're gonna quietly listen to them, but the second you hear a siren, we gotta get the hell out of here. Shh! Hi guys, welcome to the show. Welcome to the pub.
How you doing, my brother?
I'm glad to have you back, Cornel. I'm glad we finally got you, Candace.
Thanks for having me.
Now, obviously, we have both of you here. You had that fight on Fox, both black, one right, one left. Obviously, the first question is going to be sex. Sex in 2019. I rarely discuss this subject on the show, but I wanted to come sort of sideways with you guys on this. I couldn't imagine being a 20-year-old girl right now, or even a young man in college, with the culture we have today of MeToo and feminism, and I'm at the point now where I think it might be killing romance. Because with all this constant need for uber consent, how do you court a lady anymore? Like if you were a 20-year-old man.
Well, I'd have to really use my imagination, brother. That was a long time ago, I can tell you that. No, but it's two things. One is you got the art of intimacy, which we're losing. So that the notion of being vulnerable, the notion of surrendering as opposed to just resigning or dominating, that's being lost, you see. My generation, it was oldest red and try a little tenderness.
Right.
These days, it's more say my name, say my name, say my name. It's a very different orientation and disposition, you see. But on the other hand, you've got all of the policing that takes place. And so it's hard for people to really allow themselves to be themselves. And you can't really have a serious relationship if it's just posing, posturing, wearing a mask.
Yeah. Well, you were in D.C. You just met a man, happily married. I met a million Trump girls in D.C. I used to do a show there. And they were all having a lot of trouble finding a dude. And you thought, if this was 50 years ago, you wouldn't have women's political beliefs affecting their love lives.
Right. I mean, I think first and foremost, what we're seeing now is not feminism. It's something that's morphed into, I call it toxic feminism. They're pretending to be feminists, but it's not that at all, and it is scary for men to want to date. And the irony is that these toxic feminists, or modern feminists, whatever you want to call them, third wave feminists, are creating men that they don't want to date. They don't want men to act like they have their tails in between their legs. That's actually, there's something that is very unnatural about that, seeing men like that. But we have a culture and society that's sort of promoting it. I mean, I'm staunchly against it, and I think, the MeToo movement is something that I spoke out against instantly. The concept of just convicting men, absent any details, seeing things trend like #BelieveWomen. I mean, these are the sorts of things, and I'm correlating this to they can make me think of DC and the Christine Blasey Ford stuff, like just believe women. That's a scary thing. I mean, that's literally how black men got lynched.
Right, yeah.
That's literally what happened to, they got lynched. Just believe the women, this was the allegation, and go out after them. So I will never promote that sort of an ideology. There should always be facts. And that's something that we're seeing sort of disappear today.
But you would agree, of course, that there ought to be mutual respect.
Of course.
There ought to be accountability. And there ought to be reciprocity in that regard. Oh, no, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. There should be accountability.
Absolutely.
It's just, the left is primarily responsible for this. They start out with a concept that sounds good, like rape is bad, let's stop sexual assault. You go, I agree with that. And then they keep pushing that until they've kind of killed it for both sexes. Until, like, I heard about this thing where you have this consent app and you both list what's going to happen sexually together. And then you both sign it.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
And you're like, that's what prostitutes do.
You heard of that before?
I have heard about that, and the crazy part about that app is that even after they have sex, the woman is allowed to revoke consent. So she could have consented.
Oh, really?
And then you can wake up in the morning and decide that you'd no longer consent. And this is what I'm talking about. It's really scary stuff. And what I always try to tell women when I speak to them is I try to remind them that men are not dropped off by the stork. Like, they're our sons, so we're creating a society that our sons can't thrive in, that our fathers can't thrive in, that our brothers can't thrive in. So I always use my platform to speak out against it.
Well, this trick of using the nice verbiage to make the things sound justified. You see this with Antifa, where they say we're anti-fascist. What, you're against us? All right, you're pro-fascist. Or even with Black Lives Matter, you go, well, I don't think cops are racist. I didn't say that, I said Black Lives Matter. Are you against Black Lives Matter? Well, then you're against Black lives. You're saying they don't matter. Even pro-life and pro-choice play that game. Yeah, you end up being anti-life and anti-choice. And it's rhetoric that's used to trick you.
Well, part of it is, we live in a culture where these categories and labels tend to reduce each and every one of us to just one particular small aspect of who we are as human beings. And so the richness of who we are, and the contradictions that we all are, the incongruities that we all are, you see. All of us are shot through with all kind of incoherencies. That's what it is to be human. But you get one label, reduce just one particular aspect, and then you can use that as a weapon to go at folk, you see. And so, the examples that you give, the MeToo movement, it can be reducible in such a way that you end up overlooking the complexity of relationships, but you want respect, accountability, and answerability. Antifa, there's nothing wrong with being anti-fascist. Fascism is an evil, right? We know it's an evil. We all ought to be anti-fascist in a fundamental way.
I think we all are.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, you got fascists in the world now.
Who? Oh, in the world, in America. Give me an American fascist.
Oh my God, you got neo-Nazi parties of fascists.
But what percentage of the American
population? Oh no, it's small, very, very small, but I mean, there's such a thing as fascists in America.
Sure.
And then you've got a spectrum, because I mean, there's a spiritual fascism inside of all of us, in terms of what Augustine called the libido dominante, which is the lust for domination. And as a Christian, I could see it inside of myself. I can see it inside of every human being. Sin, a gangster proclivity resides inside of us. That is a kind of spiritual fascism. But political, economic fascism, institutional forms, we don't have a fascist party, but we got people who have deep fascist sensibilities. I'm going at Brother Trump on this in terms of when you actually attempt to engage in forms that are swerving outside of the law or suspending the law or demonizing vulnerable people, those are quasi-fascist sensibilities. But fascism as a whole ideology, we don't have a wholesale fascist ideological movement, but we've got some elements of it. The Klan had deep fascist sensibility. Would you agree with the Klan was deeply fascist?
Absolutely, and we have to remind ourselves that the Klan, they were Democrats, and I was actually going to make the
Yes,
argument that I
Yes,
see the Democrats actually they have a lot of fascist tendencies. And just in talking about the fact that I cannot go to a college campus and speak about the fact that I'm a black conservative and talk about why I believe in conservatism for black Americans, why I love Dr. Thomas Sowell, why I believe that the economics, a wonderful man.
I think he's wrong on a lot of things, but he's a brilliant man. Go right ahead.
I think he's right, but you can think that, and we can both sit here and we can have this conversation and have an argument, and we do that.
Absolutely.
But the fact that he can go to a college campus and show up and he won't be met with Antifa protesters, right? And people trying to shut down the speech and threaten the event, and the university demanding that you pay for an absurd police presence that no one can really afford to put together. That's how you censor me. That's how you shut me down. So to me, that's institutionalized fascism that we see every day on the left. You will never see that on the right. You will never see any place that you go as conservative. You will be welcomed. We might say, hey, I disagree with him, but I want to hear his ideas. So I think this dialogue, I think it's important so that people can determine who they actually think is right. If we don't talk, they're not getting a fair determination.
And I resent that isn't accepted as a truth. I mean, the understanding from a lot of, maybe half the country now, is that there's places that Cornel West would go to do a talk, and there'd be Nazis outside Sieg Heiling trying to prevent him. And that's just
absolutely not
true. Those
12
guys are not touring the
right.
country trying to stop liberal talks.
But I think one of the reasons is that you don't have a strong right-wing Nazi or right-wing fascist presence inside of the university. The university is very much a place where liberalism is hegemonic. And when you violate certain sensibilities of a variety of different liberals, then they can be intolerant. What you're calling fascist is intolerant. Going against that grain focuses much more on you. Now, you and I share a deep indictment of liberalism and neoliberalism. You do it from the right, mine is from the left. But because my understanding of the severe limitations of liberalism does incorporate certain elements of it, and you don't have strong Nazi presence in the university. You hardly have strong conservative presence in the university.
You don't have a strong Nazi presence
are much more
anywhere.
liberal than they are conservative. No, you do. You got it in Idaho,
in a shooting range in
Utah.
Alabama.
You got some places in the country that have some white supremacist militia and KKK, and you agree that KKK is fascist, right?
Well, I agree with him that I just don't know where it is in this country. So I've been able to travel to 47 countries over the past, 47 states over the past year, and I've not encountered or seen any pockets where I've seen Ku Klux Klan members. Do I believe that racism still exists? Of course, racism still exists. By the way, it's always going to exist. There's always going to be black people that hate white people. There's going to be white people that hate black people. But the question of whether this is some organized cell in our country that has a lot of power, I strongly disagree with that.
Well, I wouldn't say it has a lot of power. I would say it has some presence. I mean, they have empirical investigations, though, my dear sister, where you've got over 600 and some white supremacist militia groups, some of whom have death threats. And the FBI keeps track of them because the FBI infiltrates them.
Where are they?
You see? I don't know where they are because I
That's
don't
the problem.
hunt
See,
them
that,
down.
They give
that
you
should
death
tell
threats?
you that they're not a presence because we're two black Americans and we're two black Americans. We should.
I mean, the
instantly
FBI
know
is
where
not
they
going to be
are.
lying. I'm not a fan of the FBI.
Well, I'm not saying I'm not a fan of the either, but I'm saying is that if this was something that was so obvious, two black Americans sitting here, I'd be like, I'll tell you exactly where they are because I walk down the street over here. They're in Virginia, in this city, in this town. They meet here on Sundays. Every black American that I ask that says there's a Nazi or a KKK presence, you just go, where? They go, I don't know, I read it somewhere. And I think that that's unacceptable.
Well, they often cite this SPLC hate map that looks
the
like
SPLC
post
is a hate
offices.
group. I'm on the SPLC list.
No, SPL, tell me what the SPLC is now.
The Southern Poverty Law Center has these hate maps.
They're a hate group.
And you look at it, and
I'm on
it honestly looks like
I don't
it
see
looks
hate.
like post offices. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
No,
And
but
you go,
they've
that's
tried
not-
to, but same is
that's
true with the
just not true.
Anti-Defamation League will
agree.
tell you that there are hate groups against black folk, against Jews, against Muslims, against a variety of different folk, and they've got some data.
But
I mean, we
no,
can't
they
They're
don't.
deny
also
that.
not considered a credible source.
They're not
The
because they're
Anti-Defamation
funded.
League is not a-
no,
not a
they're
credible
not.
source.
They're
They're a
funded
joke.
leftists. They're funded
Oh,
leftist
no,
group.
Anti-Defamation is not leftist. Now, they're coming at me tooth and
I
nail.
sat in Congress with them, and I'm telling you right now,
They're not leftist.
if you saw my recent thing in Congress, I was sitting with all of these professors and all of these people that were, and they had no numbers, and they said, well, we don't know the numbers, but we do know that it's happening. So to me, that seems like a means to control black Americans. This is what I talk about. If this was such a big issue that we had to be worried about it, we wouldn't need an FBI report to tell us. No one needed, my grandpa growing up in the South with the real KKK, he wasn't waiting on an FBI report to tell him that the KKK was
That's
there.
true.
They were outside of his door,
That's
shooting
true.
bullets inside, and he was running to the back of his house. So this now, we have people that are more fearful, and yet there's less evidence, except they keep saying that there are reports and there are groups that are telling them. That's what I think we have to step outside of. Fair?
But you got all these different attacks, though, sister, on folk, not just in churches, but people with death threats and so forth, and these folk who supposedly are keeping track on the sources of these threats say that they're not just falling from the sky. There's got to be some networks that are in place.
Well, they say that Candace and I are the networks. They say that Jordan
Well, no,
Peterson, Dave Rubin are the networks.
I don't think nobody said Sister Candace is head of any
I'm
kind
on the
of...
SPLC list. They put some map on, and they said that I was radicalizing people on the internet. Is it such a radical idea to think that black Americans can do it without government handouts? Okay, then guilty as charged, because that's literally what I go around and I say on stage. I say black Americans to do it without government handouts. I am now... Across the board, they say that I'm radical and I'm poisoning people. They tried to blame me for inspiring a mass shooting in New Zealand, saying that this person got radicalized by my ideas of black conservatism in America. I mean, they play really horrible stuff, and fortunately for you, because you hail in liberal land, you are a liberal.
Well, I'm not liberal now. I'm a leftist.
You're a leftist.
I'm a leftist.
What's the difference?
I'm critical,
Yeah.
What's the difference in your liberal
Oh,
and
the
leftist?
difference is liberalism, refusal to engage in a critique of capitalism, refusal to engage in a critique of empire and imperial policies, and a refusal to engage in the milquetoast character of the Democratic Party. Liberals are in the Democratic Party. I have a critique of the milquetoast character of the Democratic Party.
Okay.
When you talk about the plantation, of the Democratic Party, I'm with you wholeheartedly. I've talked about the Obama plantation. We can talk about the Clinton plantation and so forth. Now, I come right back and say, there's a Trump plantation too. All of these politicians, all of these parties have their plantations.
Well, I'm not,
and I'm not a party person in that sense.
I don't tell people that you can go anywhere and hear me speak. There's nowhere where I tell people that they should abandon the Democrat Party and go to the Republican Party.
But you got a critique of the Democratic Party, Democratic leadership.
Oh, 100%.
Absolutely.
I do. And Republican leadership as well. I mean, there are people in the Republican Party, I still have absolutely no respect, God bless his soul, for John McCain, the Paul Ryan types. I regularly critique those people too, but it doesn't make the headlines, right? So, I mean, I critique both. What I advocate for is independence. And particularly government independence and shrinking government. I believe in free markets and a limited government structure. That's pretty much what I believe. And yeah, I'm painted as this horrific monster. I mean, you saw it after our debate. Like, we had a debate, and it's like, headlines, big explosion. That's not how I felt ending that debate. That's not how you felt. I emailed, tried to get him on the show, but that's what they need. They need to make it seem like we're constantly at war.
Well, you're a huge threat to the left.
They sensationalize these kind of things all the time for their own ends, for their own gain. No, but I didn't mean to interrupt. Go right ahead.
No. And I think Candace is a threat to the left because she's bringing blacks to Trump, and without the black vote, the DNC is done forever. Can you maybe explain what Blexit is?
Yeah, so I started the black exit from the Democrat Party we've seen pretty much the same thing. The Democrats, it's undoubtedly have taken advantage of the black vote over the last 6 decades. I mean, that is not, you cannot question that. And any black person in good conscience that sits down and says that the Democrat Party has not taken advantage of the black vote, in my opinion, is a bad moral character. And you have to watch those bad faith actors. To me, Blexit is about reminding the black community that we are staunchly conservative. We are conservative. You cannot untether the black community from our faith. I grew up in a very Christian household. You cannot untether the black community, although the government has systemically attempted it, from the family. I grew up and my grandfather was all about the family. These are largely conservative principles now, as you have the left is advocating really for the disruption of family. Men can be women and women should be men, and kids should pick their gender. And if you Google, this is a real thing, if you Google straight couples, all that returns back to you are gay couples. And they say there's something wrong with you if you believe in the nuclear family. And they're trying to grow government. And we've already experimented with that in the black community. We've seen that more government has earned us more heartache over the last 60 years. You can look at any statistic. Illiteracy rates in black America, they're not serving us in terms of the Department of the Education. You know that, I know that. The breakdown of families, single motherhood rate at an all-time high at 74%. You know that, I know that. So how can we stand behind people that are advocating for more government? Handouts. $22 trillion into the welfare system. Black Americans are poorer today than when they started giving out welfare in the beginning. So my perspective is just, we gotta try something different, and that something different is getting up off of our own 2 feet, putting our families back together, starting our own businesses, and that is a free market capitalist perspective, which lands me on the side of conservatism.
But you see, exactly, but I think the challenge here is, because both of us share a deep Christian faith. Both of us share a profound commitment to not just our family, but our loved ones. And both of us recognize that when the issues of integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, that just cuts across race, gender, sexual orientation, national identity. Those are just spiritual and moral values. But I think the deep disagreement is, and I think Charles Murray and others have pointed this out, that the impact of the market on working and poor parents, no matter who they are, has been devastating. When you've had profits quadrupling at the top and you got wage stagnation for 40 years, how are you going to be able to keep your family together when 2 or 3 of you, when you do work, you still live in poverty? This is where wealth inequality comes in. And see, when you talk about free market capitalism, if we had a free market capitalism, that's one thing. We've got a corporate dominated.
Crony capitalism.
Exactly. It's crony, it's predatory, 1% at the top. No matter what color they are at the top, even though they're disproportionately vanilla, but we shouldn't have bailed out the banks. We would agree with that. No,
totally
absolutely,
we need real capitalism, free market capitalism, not crony capitalism.
Well, I would just say we need a fair society, whatever it takes.
Right,
but how do you do that? I don't understand.
Well, one is you have to have conversations, to be honest, to put a spotlight on what is not talked about. And if you
Like
have
CEOs'
taboo
salaries?
issues that you're unable to interrogate and question, then you can't have a conversation. And part of the dialogue is we got this little narrow conversation between a Republican Party, most of which is tied to big money. You got a Democratic Party that's tied to big money, but acts like it's in the diversity and so forth. And by diversity, what they mean is symbolic representation of well-to-do black and brown and yellow and women folk at the top, when the vast majority of black people and white and women are catching hell. And they're supposed to live vicariously through the success of these celebrities at the top, you see. And so in that sense, you just have to be honest.
He's right.
It's hard to have a candid conversation about these things.
But part of that's our fault. So I take the perspective, so what I believe in above anything else is personal responsibility. So I don't look externally and say that everything that's happened to black America is not our fault.
I agree.
Right? We have people that, yes,
I agree.
and this has to do with the breakdown of family. When you remove the father from the home, that's why I'm so strong about dads being in the home. Those kids will pursue that paternity elsewhere. So we're seeing black kids turn to the streets. They're turning to Jay-Z, they're turning to hip hop, and they're idolizing these people. And these people are taking them in a direction that's not helpful to them, right? So the majority of the, we know, for example, California, 75% of black kids can't pass a literacy exam. They can't read a book, right? But if you ask them trivia questions about Jay-Z and Kanye and rappers like T.I. and Killer Mike, they'd be able to come back to you
Or
on
you
that.
can put them in the studio and their intelligence, and some of them have a genius that's undeniable.
Right. So my thing is that those decisions, like us taking, welfare incentivize that bad behavior in terms of removing fathers from the home. We have to be smart enough and wise enough to understand that and to turn that down. The answer to all of these problems is not more government solutions. You can't say the government did all of this and now we need more government to correct it. That doesn't make sense. That to me is the definition of insanity. Trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
But part of it is, though, is that our precious black brothers and sisters who are poor and working class need exactly what you and I have access to, which is some jobs with a livable wage. They need access to some resources so that their conception of dignity is also tied to responsibility.
Right.
You
But
see?
we have to
and
learn.
that's what we haven't been able to do,
Right.
for the most part. And even when you generate a lot of jobs, it's not jobs with a living wage. Even when you have access to the housing market, it's hard to get the housing that is adequate, especially given the market taking over, the gentrification that's taking place, people unable to gain access to neighborhoods. See, I grew up in a neighborhood. I didn't grow up in a hood. Now, we were broke as the Ten Commandments financially, but it was still a ghetto. It wasn't a hood. It was a neighborhood. You know Donny Hathaway's Ghetto. When he sings that song, and he and Leroy Hudson wrote the Ghetto, they talking about love, affirmation, as well as poverty, but it was not victim mentality at all. Curtis Mayfield was singing, he's singing about the ghetto in Chicago. He's not singing about a victim mentality at all.
Right.
He's talking about dignity, resilience, and struggle, but you would admit the poverty was overwhelming. That's partly a result of the history of the country. Slavery, Jim Crow, American terrorism, lynching, and so forth, you see. So that the stress on personal responsibility, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
But there has to be some structural realities that allow people to gain access to jobs and health care and resources.
And I completely agree with that, and I think that that's where my limited government perspective comes from. We have to, this is why I support Trump. Peeling back on regulations, I think, is the most important thing that he's done in office. It becomes impossible for an entrepreneur, like I had cousins that live in the projects, who, I want to start a food truck. And then they go and they figure out how they can start a food truck, and there's about 80,000 government regulations and steps preventing them from doing that. So it de-incentivizes them. Now they no longer want to start a food truck, and this is what I love about Trump. So people are caught up in I don't like the way he speaks, I don't like his decorum. I like his policies, I like what he's doing. And so I call myself a Trumplicant. I like Trump. If the Democrats had a candidate that was talking the way that he was talking, then I would vote for that candidate as well. But I think he's the only person that's sort of disrupting exactly what you're talking about and actually presenting more opportunities. And that's a fact, because now we have the in this country lowest ever black unemployment. So you can say it's not enough money to support the households.
We give Trump credit for that.
Right, but you can say there's not enough money to support the households, but that's decisions that are being made. So you're a single mother and you have 3 kids. Well, of course that job is not going to be able to support your household, because there are other decisions that you're doing where it's not meant to support a household. One individual is not meant to raise 3 kids by herself.
Though, and you tell me what you think, one of the contradictions in terms of any support of Trump is he's got a $750 billion military-dominated budget that goes straight to the big marketeers. Both Democratic Party and Republican Party voted for it. That's not limited government. See, when you expand the military budget, you are expanding government.
Okay, so
You're
I would disagree with you.
expanding
So and this is when I say limited government, I mean what do you believe is the function of a government?
The function of government is to protect its citizens.
That's the first thing you just said. So that's exactly, I agree with you 100%. So I'm comfortable.
But that means
with,
you're not for limited government to the degree
no,
to which the military needs to protect us.
No, but I want, that's where I want them to be limited to. I don't want the government trying to raise our children, which is what you and I were talking about off camera. When they step in and they say, now we're going to regulate this, we're going to regulate that. That to me is a government that's overstepping. But when they're limited to military, that's exactly what we need the government for, to defend and protect.
61 cents of every dollar going to the military-industrial complex, and those oligopolies and monopolies are making billions of dollars, some of it waste. Would you would agree some of it's waste in the military?
I'm sure it listens
Yes.
to government. Nothing the government does is sufficient. I agree.
If we could isolate it to the
Yeah.
750 billion,
through.
and we were all fighting that the 750 billion was too much, that would be a great place to be.
Right.
But
But
I
nobody
think we're
even talks
pissed off
about it
about
because
all
of
of
the
this other
consensus.
crap.
But it's all
like
the
the
other
trans
stuff.
thing is going to be the end
Trans is
of
the end
black
of
support
families.
for the left.
I mean,
because they're giving hormone blockers
but
to kids.
Our precious trans, there's a small group of human beings who are the most vulnerable. They're demonized the most. They have least
They're not
amount
demonized.
of power.
They're
Not
on the cover of
demonized.
magazines.
they're not demonized.
Everyone wants their kid
No.
to be one. It's the hot new
That
thing.
is the one group that is killed more by vigilantes among our
Not
citizenship than
vigilantes,
anybody
the
else.
gangsters they were dating. They're drug addicts
Yeah,
who were
a lot of
hanging
them
out
have
with
a lot
bad
of drug
boys.
issues, a lot of
They're
drug
dating
issues.
MS-13 and Bloods and Crips.
And let me
But
tell you why that I'm not talking about these individuals. They're now trying to make this a rule in school that teachers tell the kids in grade school. We're talking about K through 5 that they're allowed to pick their genders. That's where I have a problem with it. Okay, you live your life. You want to dress as a woman. You want to dress as a man. God bless you.
Because
I believe that
we
this
gotta
country
protect
should protect
personal liberties.
100%.
I agree. I agree
will
with
never
that.
have an issue with that
That's right.
whatsoever.
That's
Okay.
right.
But when you get to the extent now that you're demanding, that I now have to recognize people, that a grown man wearing a dress, I have to use the right pronouns, or I get fined or go to prison, which is actually happening in states like California, okay? That's ridiculous. So because I have two eyes and I call somebody the correct pronoun, I can get in trouble, right? And secondly, introducing it into the school system, which is over-sexualizing children at a young age, telling them they can
That's the
pick...
media and market doing that
100,
too, though.
I agree. 100%
Oh, yeah.
agree.
Money again from the top.
That is when something goes from a personal freedom to infringing upon mine. Okay, I don't have to raise my kids to believe that they can pick their gender because they can't. I feel bad for people that suffer from gender dysphoria. Both of those two ideologies can exist in the same.
Mm-hmm. But certainly we've got to protect personal liberties.
100%. Wear a
Across the
dress.
board.
I say, guys, if you want to go put on
Yeah,
a dress.
no one wants to make that illegal.
But I mean, it's not. You got the Amish, you got the Mennonites, you got the Baptists, you got different groups in religion, different groups in culture, different Muslims, Mexicans. Make sure personal liberties are protected,
Always.
no matter what.
I agree.
Now, I don't know about this dictate about the teachers telling the students. You're talking about in first grade, second grade?
Yeah, and they're not allowed,
Yeah,
they can call them in
know about
school.
that.
In school, they're allowed to call your son. You could not know your son's going to school and they could be calling her all day by a different name. They are no longer required to tell the parent because now they're protecting. And that to me is really crazy stuff. And that's what I speak out against, which gets me earned as a hate monger. And I'm going, do you understand what's happening here? You're confusing children. I don't think about that stuff when I was a kid. You know, I for like 2 years, I thought I was a tomboy. I used to run around. I used to wear baggy clothes, speak with a deep voice. I was in 4th grade because I just thought the boys were cooler. My mom didn't shave my head and call me Michael. Teachers didn't call me Michael. I was still Candace. And then
No
a
one gave
couple of
you
years
hormone
later,
blockers.
a couple of years later, I went through puberty, and suddenly I thought the guys were cute. Right? And that's what's being disrupted now that they're trying to normalize allowing children to go under hormone therapy when they haven't even hit puberty, or allowing these children to say that they're different people. It's confusing.
That's really going to make the black
I
community snap.
I didn't know about but any community. We're not just talking
More
about the
black.
More
There's
black,
more.
yeah, black
White
community
people are
doesn't
more. Okay, my son's a girl.
Yeah, no. Black moms,
people are
you're
like,
not calling.
I ain't
You're
having
not
it.
calling my son. I don't have a son yet, but let me find out that some school is calling my son by a name that I didn't give him. Black moms will show up 100%.
I would argue that the whole trans movement is the end of black support of the left. They pushed it too far.
Right.
I think a lot of the left sees blacks as their pets, and they're going to lose their pets. Their pets are going to start misbehaving now.
They do treat us like pets.
No, but when you talk about just as a Christian, for me, I begin with the notion that anybody, any gender, creature with a language made in the image and likeness of God, they have a sanctity. That's why I say precious trans folk. They got the same sanctity that I have, that my daughter, my son, anybody else has.
I agree, 100%.
And that's just a spiritual truth that I hold on to, whether it's popular or unpopular. I'm just going down with it.
I agree with
you. But then when you move into society, you see, I don't want any kind of social engineering.
That's what's
You're
happening.
getting folks saying, okay, this is the only way to go. No,
That's what's happening.
You see, I don't know about that. If I saw that kind of thing, I'd be critical of it.
I'll send you something on it a bit.
But it's so easy to fall into a kind of dehumanizing mode. And I come from a people who've been dehumanized so easily. Black folk, brown folk, poor whites, gays, lesbians, Jews, Muslims. We got long histories of being easily dehumanized.
Yes,
and
I agree with you. But
normalized.
when we're so determined to be tolerant, we tend to tolerate intolerance, especially from Islam. Like everyone talks about Charlottesville and Heather Heyer, obviously a catastrophe.
Yeah, and I was with Heather just 20 minutes before she died.
You were?
Oh yeah, I was right there.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah, I was standing right there. The neo-Nazi brothers were spitting on us, telling us off and so. We were singing this little light of mine. You know, I'm not clergy, but they were clergy. I'm just Christian. I'm a layperson. And we were right there, and Heather was right on the side. We were talking just 20 minutes before she was hit. You see, and she was just a magnificent human being, very young, very committed.
But this whole concept of fighting
but
hate,
any
which we all
religion
advocate,
can be used, though, brother. I mean, Islam's got fascist versions.
But we hear so much about this stupid
so
Nazi hate crap that I'm just sick of hearing about. No one talks about the West Side Highway.
The West Side Highway?
Yeah, where 6 people were killed, 6 or 8 were killed by a jihadist. No one talks about Fort Hood, about the beheading in Oklahoma, about the Orlando shooting at Pulse nightclub, about San Bernardino. We've heard about Heather Heyer literally more than all of those other victims combined. And every time you see these hate groups where they're out there to stop hate and hate watch and SPLC, ADL, it's just skinhead, Nazi, zero jihadists, zero jihadi training camps.
And quite frankly, I agree with you. And I think that what really, gets really, well, some black people can get very upset with me because I say, you want me to focus on white supremacy when we know that 95% of black Americans that are killed by other black people.
19 a day.
95%.
Yeah.
So my chances, I should be more afraid sitting next to a black man, all right, than if you're looking at just statistics. People don't like that because that's the truth. They don't like that. Oh, no, it feels better. Let's focus on the white supremacy. Let's focus on this area, which basically never happens if you're looking at statistics because you don't want to talk about fixing our communities. And when I spoke at the White House 2 weeks ago, I spoke about Tyshawn Lee.
It does happen.
Yeah, but 95%
disproportionately
every year, of black Americans that are killed in a homicide event are killed by other black people. And that's not even including Hispanics. So maybe another 3% were killed by Hispanics, who knows? We're talking about a slither of people, black Americans, that are killed by whites in this country annually. And yet the focus on it would make you think it's happening every single day. That's my problem, because you want to know what that says? That says that they're purposely having us focus on things they're never going to fix our community, okay? If we want to talk about fixing our communities, you got to talk about gang violence. Because and I spoke about that at the White House, Tyshawn Lee, a 9-year-old kid who got shot point blank, lured into an alley and shot point blank because of gang violence, because someone had a hit against his father, so they decided to kill his son.
Yeah.
The guy was laughing in court. Everybody turns away from it. We're not going to talk about it because, it was happening in our community. Let's instead go out and protest in the strange event that a black American gets shot by a police officer unarmed. And this is the crap that I say. They have you looking at something that's never, ever, ever going to matter, right? That's never going to fix anything, because they know that we're slaughtering ourselves at a faster rate, and that's what they want.
But two things. One is that there is a difference between a policeman who kills a person and a citizen killing another citizen, because the police represent.
True, but they're killing 19 a day.
No. Well, I mean,
the blacks
the numbers,
are like
absolutely.
10 a year.
And we have to speak the truth.
Yeah,
and so the truth that you talk about in terms of disproportionately black on black violence is something that you have to speak to. But then the second point is this, though, that there are a number of folk in the black community who both talk about it and try to organize against the black on black violence. You
So
get
why
it in
aren't
preachers,
they? Why don't they
you
have the
get it in
platform that these Black Lives Matter groups have?
Well, one is because you got a liberal media that does not want to put a spotlight on black people organizing themselves and dealing with problems inside of the black community.
Because that would help us.
Well, I mean, that's a certain white supremacist sensibility.
Right, but, and that's what I say. So agree.
Absolutely, but that does not mean, though, that you don't want to keep these police accountable when they shooting these young folk day in and day out.
Accountable. They go
Not
to
day in and
jail.
day
They
out.
lose their
They
pension.
go to jail. You got one going to
Hold
jail,
up,
brother.
let's
You got one going to jail out of all
Let's
these
correct
shootings.
the record. This is not happening day in, day out. In the year where they made it seem like it was the absolute worst in 2016, 16 unarmed black men were shot and killed. By rate, more white men were killed by.
It's 1,000
But also,
in the
More white
country.
men.
unarmed can mean was armed. It can mean
could
trying to kill
going
you
at
with
him,
the
trying to
car.
kill. That's correct. 16. Even if we're being generous, 16. You had a higher chance as a black American man of being struck by lightning than you did of being shot unarmed. Okay, white men were killed by police officers at a higher rate, as were Hispanic men. We know none of their names because it was a narrative. It was all about the black vote. They draw up a narrative, they decide who they're going to go after. In 2016, it happened to be police officers. We're going to see who it is in 2020. This is not about helping to save black lives. You can't tell me that you're focusing on 16 lives when a more unsafe place for a black person to be would be in its mother's womb. We're slaughtering our offspring at a way faster rate, and we have more black babies being aborted than born alive in cities like New York. So to me, it's all a farce, and I think it is because the liberal media.
But I mean, you and I are critical of liberal media, but I think you have to have a bit more open-mindedness at the spectrum and the continuum. We've got statistics on the percentages of black men who will be pulled aside in the car. The percentage of men who, when we went to jail in New York City about 8 years ago here with the stop and frisk, when you had over 90% of the folks stop and frisk were young black brothers and brown brothers.
There was
now,
not
those
over
are not
90%.
killings.
They
Those
were-
are not killings.
Right.
But
They were
they're on a
disproportionately
spectrum.
pulling over whites.
No. Oh, not at all.
As they appeared in the
No,
crime
brother.
stats, yes.
No,
The
no.
way
Even when
blacks
the
and whites
judge,
appeared in the
though,
New York
brother,
crime stats, they were pulled over less than that. There was more whites pulled over than they appeared in the crime stats.
But you remember the woman who
Bloomberg even conceded that.
who was the judge when she went through all the statistics and said, "My God, under Bloomberg,
Yes,
you had
and she was
over
later
3
fired for
point something
incompetence.
No.
She was a boob.
Yeah, no.
I'll
but
say something. I'll ask a
jump right in.
question.
Sure.
Black Americans, we make up 13% of the population, and we account for over 50% of all the homicides in this country. Is it possible that we're getting arrested more because we're committing more of the crimes?
Oh no, in terms of getting arrested
And I'm talking
for a particular
homicides.
crime.
13% of the
But
population.
We're
over
talking about police
57%.
killing or being pulled over
Okay, so you're
for driving in the
saying
car
for-
and so forth. When in terms of the sheer number of homicides, you've got a disproportionate number of poor black people, disproportionately men.
Well, we're
who
disproportionately committing the
have-
crimes in this country, all of them, across the
No,
board.
not all of them. No, not white collar crime. Not
that's
Wall
okay.
Street crime.
I'm talking about
You're talking about
violent crimes.
you're talking about like
White collar
murder,
crimes,
so-
I
yes,
am.
absolutely,
You're
absolutely.
correct
No,
about that.
you're right.
It just
about
sounds
that.
like there's a lot
Absolutely.
of disingenuous agenda
That's my
with
thing.
the
It's
left.
like, just be
and at the
real.
beginning of
But
this,
the
you were
problem
saying
is, though, you got to have a press that is open enough to deal with all of these issues candidly, and
the
that's what
press
we
is
don't
obsessed with the Nazi shit. They're obsessed with hate. We live in a racist society. It's way worse than it was in the 70s and the 80s. We've gone backwards in time. And the thing I hate about that narrative, like I've got these friends, Max Hare, John Kinsman, they're Proud Boys. Proud Boys are a multi-racial club. There's gays, Jews in it, and they all love Trump. The DNC is pounding on them. They're a hate group. These guys are getting sentenced next week, Max Hare and John Kinsman. 3.5 years would be best case scenario, could be 15, because Antifa jumped them, and it was like the third Antifa fight of the night. Antifa jumped them and they beat up Antifa. And the court said, you beat them up too much. And because of the Nazi narrative, the jury went, throw the book at him. One of the guys has 4 black kids, and he might not see those kids for 15 years because he fought back after an ambush. And it's the idiotic Nazi narrative.
They call me a Nazi sympathizer. They call me a person that supports Hitler. I mean, you're exactly right. They overuse that term, and the problem is that when you do that, when you're willing to paint such a broad stroke that you start calling black people white supremacists, it becomes very hard to take you seriously.
They call it multiracial white supremacy.
But you know, one of the ironies of Charlottesville was, well, two things. One, I saw a black man marching with the neo-Nazis when we were being spit at and cussed out.
No.
So I said,
you know why? Because
He was not a neo-Nazi.
no, I didn't say
There was-
neo-Nazi. He's marching
No,
with
he wasn't.
them.
There was two rallies that day. There was the statues.
That's what I was gonna say, it was about
and
the
then there was the
statues.
neo-Nazi crap after.
And it was
When
separate.
Trump said there's good people on both sides,
That's what he was talking
about the statue
Yep.
rally.
There were people that were just
No,
there.
but-
There were just
Two
there
rallies.
black people that were there protesting because they didn't want the statue torn down at
But
all.
but
And
these
then they
folks, I'm
mixed
talking about the
them
one with the
neo-Nazis.
mask and had the live ammunition with the neo-Nazi signs.
What, the Dukes, I mean the Dukes Hazard, the Confederate flag? Or neo-Nazi signs?
It was a combination of Confederate flags and neo-Nazi signs. You know, there's about 29 groups there. So it was a heterogeneous group of right-wing folk willing involved in violent activity.
That
you see.
whole thing was
But
a
the other
bizarre
thing,
shit
too,
show
you
that
see,
we talk about
when
way
you
too
talk
much.
about Antifa too, you see, Antifa actually saved a number of our lives from being attacked in Charlottesville. Because there was all of a sudden, we were standing there, and as they walked by, after about 20 minutes, it got more and more intense. Police pulled back completely.
That's what jeopardized your life.
Police pulled back
The
completely.
mayor trying to cause a
Yes.
scene.
Well, this was a crucial factor. I agree with that. Police saw what was going on and just sat there.
They were
but
told to.
when,
They were told to.
But all of a sudden, when there was a charge with these ammunition mask on and it coming at us, and we're standing there, the rest of the folk are in their clergy costume. I'm dressed just like I'm dressed now, and all of a sudden Antifa comes in swinging to protect us.
Well, let me tell you
Now
something.
you see that kind of self-defense is very important. I think a right to self-defense is crucial.
Sure.
But listen,
It's
I
crucial.
can't
Tell that to the
let's
victims
not,
of Dayton,
let's
Ohio.
not make Antifa sound light, because they are a domestic terror group. They've attacked me multiple times. They've thrown things. I was sitting in a restaurant eating breakfast, and they chased me out and threatened my
Well,
life.
that's
And we had to
wrong.
have an
That's
entire
wrong.
police force.
That's
so
wrong.
maybe
That's wrong.
maybe
They
back
killed
in the
9
day,
people in
maybe
Dayton,
back
Ohio.
in
But
the day,
that's,
some
you
KKK
know.
members defended somebody, but to paint them in a light that they're suddenly a great group because they did
No,
one
I'm
thing.
talking about my experience with them.
Yeah,
I got to
but
be
we
true
have
to
to
my
be clear.
experience
They-
with
they
them.
are a
Your
domestic-
experience with them is one in which they did something that was wrong. If
Yeah,
they attacked
I
you
was
in
eating
breakfast
breakfast.
and tried to threaten your life,
That's all on camera.
then that's
Yeah,
wrong.
I was
That's
eating
wrong.
breakfast. You know?
Well, America's
That's
experience
wrong.
with them is also sending Antifa guys end up in jail for this bullshit. They end up putting other people in jail. They end up committing suicide because they're in over their heads. And then the Dayton, Ohio shooting was 9 people dead, including the shooter himself. I've counted about 17 deaths that come from Antifa rhetoric
Well,
and
see, I
Antifa
don't know.
violence.
I don't know about that.
That's
They're
more
a
than black
domestic
people that were
terror
killed by
group.
police officers.
Pardon me?
That's more than black people
I
that
don't
were
know
killed by
about
police
Right.
officers.
Okay, look, I have a bad feeling the cops are going to bust this soon. Let's try to get some tangible, hard, concrete things that could help the black community in this country. Give me.
Dear sister, I mentioned one. There has to be honest spotlight casting on realities that fall outside of our ideologies. We have to
That's
be
what we're
candid across the
screaming.
board. We got to be candid about the militarism at the top. We got to be candid about ugly treatment on the bottom. You got to be candid about the wealth inequality. You got to be candid about the issue of personal responsibility.
So free speech.
You got to be. Oh, absolutely. You got to have free speech, but without injurious harm.
Okay, so Candace should be able to
injurious harm.
talk at any college.
Oh, sure. There's no doubt about that. Now, of course, see, college is a different place than a community. And what I mean by that is that colleges do have the right to decide
Yeah.
who is going to speak there relative to
And they
what
take
the
federal
issues
funding and
are.
they decide that it's only going to be leftist
But it's got
politicians.
to be ideologically and politically diverse. But they have a right to do that. But when it comes to community, that's very different. You have a right to speak any community, any corner, and ought to be protected there as long as you don't engage in injurious harm.
Right.
you see.
I've never, ever advocated for violence. I've never been violent towards any person. I say what I believe. And I think that you'll find, and this is why I think the media is so obsessed with painting us as they did after we had our debate, is that we actually agree on more than we disagree. I think what we disagree on is how we fix it, right? So we totally disagree on how we fix it.
We have a critique of the establishment in both parties. See, your support of Trump means you have an indictment of the conservatism in the Republican Party vis-a-vis its establishment.
That's correct. I think he represents a new form of conservatism, and when he called it a swamp, he was being honest. I mean, there's just people on the left and the right. We were all losing.
But the problem is, see, this is part of the contradiction, though. But when you come in, and then Trump, his attitude toward Wall Street, his attitude toward the military-industrial complex, they expand. They become even more powerful. You see.
So if my focus,
he has to hit them head on. He didn't have the courage to hit them. That's my left-wing critique. He doesn't have the courage to hit them head on, but he can spend all his time talking about precious Mexicans and Muslims and other folk.
Well, good for the illegals. Got to go. I mean, you know they're harming Black America.
Demonize the precious Mexican
no,
brothers
don't call
and
them.
sisters.
Don't call
He doesn't
them
demonize
precious.
Mexicans.
Yes, he does.
He talks about the ones
illegals.
crossing
No,
the
he's
border.
talking about all of them as criminals, all of them as so-and-so. That's just
Leah,
wrong.
First off,
that's wrong.
Foremost, I'm going to say this. First, I'm going to say about illegal immigration, period. We know that under Barack Obama, the United States commissions did a report to determine who was harmed by illegal immigration. They determined, and this was a report done by both sides, that Black American men between the ages of 18 and 21 are the people that hurt the most.
Especially in California.
Because they're the ones that have to compete. And when they come into these neighborhoods and they allot it, and he's correct to say, we know that the majority of the drugs coming over the border, where are they going into? Our neighborhoods, right? So to me, it is so crucial for Black Americans to understand that an illegal, anybody that's promoting for open borders and for telling you to flood them in are not the people that are trying to help Black America. They know that we are the ones going to have to compete for them.
Why wouldn't Trump say that rather than call them rapists and criminals?
Right, listen.
They're not rapists. They're
A
coming to find a good job.
disproportionate number of the illegals crossing the border are rapists.
They are. It's weird.
80% of the girls who
believe
cross
that.
the border get raped on the journey.
80%.
They take birth control on the way over the border.
That's just
It's
a fact.
just an accepted part of the transition.
Yeah, and that's why it's weird.
Mexico doesn't have room in prisons. They encourage criminals to cross the border.
Does that mean the 11 million precious
30 million.
illegals in this country? You think it's 30?
I think it's 30.
Well, I think most people traditionally say 11 or 12 million.
The
But
leftists.
of those 11 and 12 million, what percentage of those you think are rapists?
A disproportionate number, more than they
Rapists
are
or
represented in the
like just
population.
in general committing crimes?
Well, criminal. He says he called them criminals and rapists, so it'd be both.
Criminals.
I don't know, the way he talks about him is so vicious. It's so
I'm sorry, but if
cold-hearted,
you go
it's
into
so
any of these
callous.
sanctuary
But as
cities
a
and you
Christ-
see
as
the
a
amount
Chri-
of crimes that are being committed because
No,
they're
but-
sanctuary,
but-
you can't park your car
But-
in San Francisco for 5 minutes without it getting broken into. Happened to me. I was there literally 5 minutes. Came outside.
But that's
all
been
of our
true
stuff.
for a long time in a lot of hoods, a lot of communities.
Come on. California was not the way that it is now.
Well, I'm talking about other communities,
Yes.
other communities.
Listen, I'm not. You're never going to hear me make a blanket statement that all people are this or that. I'm not
Right,
going to say
right.
that all Mexicans are coming to this country. Some of them are literal children that are being used by adults that are
That's
trying to get in
true.
here. Like
That's
you cannot. He should be careful not to issue those blanket statements. And listen,
He's
here's what
gotta
I'll
pull
say.
back
By the
on
way,
that. That's ugly
but he
language.
has, because you know what? Then he was a candidate. Now he's a president, and he hasn't done those sort of sweeping statements since then. And people are holding on to it because now he's actually proven himself to be a pretty stand-up president. He's delivering results. He hasn't said anything super harmful to anybody at all. And I agree that illegal immigration is a problem that needs to be tackled. So I'm willing to look over a sentence that he said while he was on the campaign trail and look at what he's actually doing.
He said a number of times, but yeah.
He didn't say it a number of times. He said it one time in a speech. He says, at Fish Breeze, he said they're not giving us their best people, and that's a fact. If they are their best people, the government would be fighting to keep them in their countries because they'd be driving up their economy. Obviously, they're not giving us their best people.
Well, it depends on what you mean by best, too, though. If it's just best in
saying
terms of
that-
professionals,
likely
in terms
to
of
commit crimes.
education.
Yeah,
and
least
so
likely to
forth.
commit crimes. Is if they were super educated
No, but
people
you've
that
got
were
some
doctors and
professionals
lawyers.
and educated folk in this country and other countries who commit a lot of crimes,
We're
too. though.
splitting. I think we're
Yes, but
splitting
that's
hairs here.
anecdotal.
Well, I'm agreeing with you that we have to be careful and not demonizing an entire group of people.
Absolutely.
But I hope that you do understand that illegal
Just-
immigration is something that really harms Black communities first and foremost, and that's a proven fact done by a report that was done under Barack Obama.
But see, I would want to put the stress not so much on that competition. That competition is real. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But my stress is much more on, first, the businessmen and women who come in wanting to exploit and walking away with profits that are just obscene. And this is where I'm with Brother Bernie, as you know, right? I'm much more concerned about that top 1% that comes in a variety of different colors who are getting off with obscene wealth and resources, while those of us who are in the middle classes, working classes, and poor fighting for the crumbs.
Well, then I gotta tell you
Fighting
something.
for the
You're with him, and if he was elected,
I don't see Trump talking about a critique of Wall Street the way Bernie does.
If Bernie was elected tomorrow, all of those Wall Street people would be sending their money overseas, and they would get out of here
That's the problem.
as fast as possible on their planes.
We all
They have the
agree.
resources to. And
No,
you know what
And
happened?
we would see
You know
how
what
big
happened?
of gangsters they really
No,
are.
you know what
They're
happened?
not committed to the
Suddenly
country. They're committed to their own.
Correct.
You want to know how
Correct.
we would see it? We'd all be broke. All of the markets would crash. There'd be nothing here because we don't have the entrepreneurial steer. The people that are entrepreneurs are going to leave for countries that allow them to be rewarded based on their hard work. Nobody is going to stay in the country. They say they're going to tax me 75%. I'm leaving. Period. Right? So then you're going to have a system where you have a bunch of people that are standing behind Bernie. The do-nothing people are going to have no money to go around because there is no entrepreneurship. The rich people have fled. It's exactly what happened to Chicago. We know that Bernie's idea of socialist policies does not work. It cannot be implemented. The grievance behind it might be accurate. The application of it does not work. So we have to come up with a better solution than we're going to take it from the rich people.
But just think of what you just said, though, sister. You're saying that Wall Street has got America with a gun to its head.
No, I didn't say that.
Well, you said it. If in fact Bernie were elected, they would leave the country, no commitment to the country.
That's just common sense.
And
I
watch
would
the
leave
country
too.
go under.
I would leave too. I'm not Wall Street. That's common sense. If you're telling me that you're going to tax me
Are
at 75%.
you saying that your commitment to America is such that you would rather leave the country with money
No, my
than watch
commitment to
America
myself
go
and my
under?
family is enough that I'm not letting you take 75% of my hard work as a girl who came from absolutely nothing and grew up in a rat-infested apartment.
Eisenhower
No
had higher
government.
levels,
Do
my
not care.
sister.
I'm answering your question.
Eisenhower had
And you
higher
answer my
levels.
question. As a
Would you
girl who
leave
came from
under
nothing and
Eisenhower?
worked for everything that I have, no government is coming in and taking 75% of my income. I would leave. It's not a commitment to an America. It's a commitment to myself and a commitment to common sense.
So, but what I'm saying is, so if you had lived under Dwight Eisenhower's regime where they had 80%,
They had
you would have
80%.
left America?
No one paid that.
No.
That was like a few
No,
movie
they had
stars.
80%, brother.
No one was paying that.
Under
though.
FDR, they had even higher.
I have
You
to
would
look
have
it
left
up.
FDR.
I'm going to plead ignorant because I'd have to look up
We'd
because
have to check that out.
sounds high to me.
I'm
80%
telling you,
does not sound accurate,
yes,
so I'm
it
gonna
was for
plead
that
ignorance
1%,
I can't
because
debate
it was
something.
gradations. You know, it was gradations.
I would
It
have
was
to
for the
plead ignorance.
1%,
It
but
was
this
for the
was back when
1%,
that
I'm talking
1%
about. It's
was
for the
like
1%. It wasn't for everybody now.
Infinitesimally small percent of the population. Movie stars, moguls were paying those.
90% it was.
Yes, but I think everyone agrees. No one likes a $500 million CEO salary when the people on the
It's
assembly line are paying
obscene.
30. The problem is
Absolutely. It's
when the
obscene.
government tries to regulate that shitty situation, they make it even worse. The government makes everything worse. You were talking at the beginning about.
So what do we do then? How do you recognize the dignity of the worker if the only alternative is if we do something and intervene, the well-to-do walk off with their wealth and watch everything
One
come
thing
up?
we do is close the borders.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't we actually put more wealth back into the country, close the borders, take care
That's
of
not
our
enough.
people first, hashtag America first, right? What he's talking about, and create opportunities for the people that came from nothing like I did to become wealthy.
But
based on their own hard work and their good ideas. I don't need to hate the rich man. I want to learn how to become the rich man.
Well, this is where we have a difference. If it were the case that when we say America first, we were saying American poor and working people first.
We are.
We're not saying that. No, wealth inequality has gone up.
No.
It's gone up.
Yes, but
the tax
they've
cuts
both gone up.
Would
The rich,
you
the
agree
poor
the
have
tax cuts
gotten
helped the
richer.
rich
The gap
much
has
more than it
gotten
did
bigger.
for the working people?
No, I would disagree.
You think that Trump's tax cuts
It helped
worked?
The corporations that got those tax cuts, I have two sisters. Both of them then instantly got bonuses and raises because of the tax cuts. I have a cousin who works for Starbucks.
I'm rich. They were murder on me.
Who works for Starbucks. She got a raise instantly. So you're saying the corporations got the tax cuts. The people work for the corporations. That's what you trickle down economics.
Yeah, but trickle down doesn't trickle the way it should. Nah, I think
So I just answered your question. Every single person in my family
think we can
received
control
benefits
the
because of
trickle.
that, and they are not wealthy by any stretch of any imagination. One of them was working at Starbucks, and she got a raise because of the tax cuts. And all of them said,
But
"Oh,
how
no,
big
we
was that
didn't need
raise? How big was that
See,
raise?
now you're splitting hairs. You asked me a question, I answered it. So for her, you might say the raise is small. Okay, it was for her it was
very
$1.
small, but the
she was
raise,
only
but the
making-
raise at the top.
But to her,
The taxes that they got at the top
Okay.
were gargantuan. Then we got your precious sister getting a little tax, getting a little increase.
she was happy about it. So you,
Well, no, we're not talking about people being happy. People can be
Just tell
happy
me,
for
she was
all
happy.
kinds of
She was
things.
happy about it. So my
No.
sister was happy about her bonus. My cousin was happy about her raise at Starbucks. My other sister was happy about her bonus. So we don't need Bernie to be aggrieved for them when they're happy.
Thatcher used to talk about this, where
I
they said the
don't
gap
know.
is the worst it's ever been. And Thatcher goes, yes, the gap is bigger now, but the poor are making more money. So yes, the gap increases and the rich are richer, but the poor also got richer.
Well, you got to look
and a
at
lot of lefties would rather the gap was smaller and both were poor
They want
than for this to be up here.
Their idea of
No,
equality
no,
is everybody be poor.
Oh, no,
If you look
that's
at every
not true.
policy
That's
that Bernie
not true.
is pitching, it basically means we will not have equality until everyone is poor.
But Bernie is not calling for absolute equality. He's calling for fairness. He doesn't want everybody to have
That's not
exactly
fair.
the same
You can't
thing.
rob people. You can't rob people because they made it and they were successful. And by the way, he's not saying just the corporations. He's talking about people that live within a certain income bracket, right? And I refuse, as someone that has worked for everything that that I have, someone that travels 6 days a week to work, I refuse to give my money up for people that I know. I have relatives that are on welfare, that sit on their butts all day and do absolutely nothing. I'm not doing that. I'm sorry.
But you have to agree, most of the money that we pay to the government by means of taxes go to the military. It's 61 cents for every dollar. When you pay taxes, the first person you look at ought not be the person on welfare. The first person you look at ought to be Pentagon, State Department, marketeers, oligopolies, monopolies who have contracts making gobs of money with guns.
Okay, so let's just shrink it all. Let's shrink it all.
If we could shrink the military section of the budget. Now, in order to do that,
welfare.
we'd have to go against Trump.
Welfare.
We got to go against
And
Trump
welfare.
for that.
And welfare. I'm sorry.
But we hardly even have a collective right to welfare anymore after Bill Clinton in 1996. That's what he
talking
did.
about?
He undercut the right of citizens to have an automatic
what's
right
great
to
about
welfare.
municipalities-
So they got different programs that's in place. But it's no longer welfare as traditionally understood. That he ended welfare as we traditionally understand it. But when you talk about the corporate welfare at the top, that has been increasing exponentially, and they are corrupt elites who have politicians in both parties who they are controlling.
Trump is not getting controlled right now. That's pretty obvious.
He's a stick of dynamite.
He can't get a fair shake in the media, and that lets you know that he's going against
Well, no.
corporate interests.
The media is not the place to look because the media has its own blindness in terms of militarism. Has the media said anything about the 7 wars that we're involved in? 26,172 bombs the last year of Obama in 7 countries. The bombing that's taking place right now.
They would never
won't
say anything
anything
against Obama.
Well, no.
Don't be foolish.
No. We talking MSNBC won't say anything.
No one.
Fox would say something against Obama. But Fox doesn't have a critique of militarism either.
No, I haven't heard a
Why?
lot of
Because Trump himself has a militaristic dimension. This is where we go back to our disagreement. He's got a strong militaristic disagreement. Fox is very much more and more an extension of certain crucial voices in Fox, an extension of Trump. MSNBC was an extension of Obama. You got 2 state presses with no serious public conversation. None of them talking about the wars. None of them talking about Afghanistan. None of them talking about drones. None of them talking about surveillance. None of them talking about the national security state. Now, look at the discussion these days about whistleblowers. Isn't it interesting to see the Democrats all concerned about whistleblowers now?
Mm-hmm.
Under the Democrats, they sending whistleblowers to jail like this. These are the worst person. I was at the trial of Manny in Maryland, right? He was demonized like I don't know what. He was just one example. There's a host of others too. Now you get a whistleblower against Trump, and they acting like whistleblowers is the best thing since Jesus. You say, wait a minute, this hypocrisy is overwhelming.
Well, can we at least agree on that? We all like all whistleblowers of all types.
Well, no, we don't have to like all of them, but at least you had to have a credible
They're
analysis
actual
of each
whistleblowers.
one.
I want
there
total
are some real
transparency.
ones. There are some real ones.
Everywhere.
We want to know what's going on behind those closed doors.
Yes. Uh-oh, cops.
Oh, good God Almighty. Oh, Sister Katie.